Your Excellency, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and I must add some grace to my tongue to welcome you, sir. The reason being, you landed only 3 a.m. this morning, where you went to deliver the keynote address at the Financial Times Africa Summit. This is in no doubt shows that you love Nigeria deeply. Me, Msme Clinics will have still been sleeping. But you're here just a few hours after landing from the UK. Can we put our hands together for the Vice President, please? I'd like to welcome the Honorable Minister of Budget and National Planning, Senator Udoma Udo Udoma, and other members of the Federal Executive Council that are here. The Chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Mr. Abba Bukar-Kari, and other members of the board of the NESG that are here, I welcome them. Also here with us, I'd like to welcome very specially all the CEOs of the companies that are here, members of the diplomatic corps, our development partners, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Federal Ministry of Budget and National Planning and the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, I welcome all of you most heartily to the 23rd edition of the Nigerian Economic Summit, focused on the opportunities in the economy and the need for productivity and employment as a means of actualizing our economic recovery and growth plan. Experts believe that Nigeria presents a tale of contrasting fortunes, more or less a coin with two different sides. While one side presents the inhabitable environment due to sporadic violence here and there, and the huge gulf in income status, with 43% of the 180 million of our people still below poverty line. But there's the other side that is less talked about, the side that shows the vast potentials and the fragments of a rapidly growing economy, the population size, the large workforce with relatively young median age, vast mineral resources that is beyond oil, and the diversity and richness of our culture. All of this makes Nigeria the land of opportunities. So in the next 3 days, we'll engage our minds and think Nigeria. And there's one person alongside his board has thought Nigeria in the last 23 editions of the Economic Summit. He's the chairman of the Summit Group. Let me also, alongside, welcome all the past presidents of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group that are here with us. And so, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome the chairman of the Economic Summit Group, Mr. Abba Bukar, to please step forward here and welcome all of us.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, His Excellency, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, the Honorable Minister of Budget and National Planning, Mr. Udoma, all federal cabinet members, distinguished and honorable members of National Assembly, members of the Board of Directors of the NESG, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, welcome to NES 23. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the 23rd Nigerian Economic Summit, jointly organized by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG, and the Federal Ministry of Budget and National Planning. The first edition of the summit was held in February 1993. We've gone a long way. It has remained the most robust and credible platform for the interrogation of our national economic policy direction and indeed the economic growth strategies designed to address the challenges of our times. The Nigerian Economic Summit Group has evolved into leading advocate for the reform of the Nigerian economy into one that is open and globally competitive. The summit is designed to facilitate public-private dialogue towards accelerated national development. The adoption of recommendations proffered at these annual summits are evident in many of the economic reform initiatives of past governments. These include the liberalization of the telecommunications sector, pension industry reforms, the privatization of public enterprises, and the adoption of public-private partnership in the provision of much-needed infrastructure. The NESG has continued its tradition of engaging the various arms of government, and we are pleased that His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari is ably represented by His Excellency Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo. Thank you, sir, for coming. We are optimistic that the robust dialogue that will hold over the next 3 days will make a meaningful impact on the economic fortunes of our great country. When we held the last edition of the summit, Nigeria was grappling with the worst economic slowdown and first recession in 25 years. But the government and business community can now heave a measured sigh of relief as the latest GDP growth numbers confirmed that Nigeria has slipped out of recession, albeit with a very modest 0.55% growth in the second quarter of this year. The recovery was led by the oil sector, which was driven by higher oil prices and improved production. At the last summit, the NESG called for a more pragmatic engagement of the Niger Delta region by the federal government to address the frequent disruption to oil production linked to vandalism of oil production and transportation infrastructure. We are pleased to note that the impact of the engagement of the government and the resultant impact on the broader economy. However, growth in the non-oil economy remained low. It's growing, but low. Nevertheless, we note that action led by the Central Bank of Nigeria to stabilize the exchange rate and increase dollar supply to the economy also meant that many industries in the non-oil sector were able to turn the corner after a very difficult 2016. While the steps taken have been positive for the economy, it is important to note that the cost and supply of dollars remain a challenge for many businesses. These and other challenges continue to make Nigeria a tough place to do business. We, therefore, emphasize again that policy and institutional reforms must continue if we are to realize the potential of this economy. At NES 22, with the theme Made in Nigeria, the summit focused on the need to revitalize the economy through strategies that promote inclusive growth, as well as higher levels of broad-based production and consumption. We have to produce what we consume. It sought to draw attention to the potential to drive economic growth by tapping the globally recognized Nigerian ingenuity and entrepreneurial spirit. If I can bottle it and sell it, I might probably be on the Forbes list. In addition, the summit drew greater attention to the large local market for Nigerian goods and services, as well as the attractiveness of the country for foreign investors. At that summit, the keynote address highlighted the urgent need for the government to craft a clear and comprehensive policy framework that articulates national development plans and preferences, and for the government to clearly communicate this policy. We are pleased to note that the government responded to this challenge by articulating a 4-year economic recovery and growth plan. The actualization of this plan is the focus of this year's Nigerian Economic Summit. Other recommendations from NES 22 include the fast tracking of the legislative process to ensure that bills that will support the efforts to take Nigeria out of recession should be passed into law before the end of 2016. We are pleased that the Secure Transactions in Movable Assets Act and the Credit Bureau Reporting Act have been signed into law. They will make it easier for micro, small, and medium enterprises to have access to credit. The NESG has remained active in its advocacy for more competitive economic environment. Over the last year, the NESG has participated actively in the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBEC, and welcomed the first and second 60-day action plans designed to address the ease of doing business in Nigeria. We have also deepened the work of the National Assembly Business Environment Roundtable, NASBA, which was created in 2016 as a platform for the legislature and the private sector to engage, deliberate, and act on a framework that will improve Nigeria's business environment through a review of relevant legislations and provisions of the Constitution. Since October last year, we have worked with the National Assembly on the following bills: the National Transport Commission Bill, Federal Roads Bill, National Roads Fund Bill, Nigerian Ports and Harbor Bill, Nigerian Inland Waterways Bill, Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Bill, National Independent Warehouse Regulatory Agency Bill, National Payment Systems Bill, amongst others. We are also working with the National Assembly to review the Companies and Allied Matters Act, CAMA, and Investments and Securities Act. Through our 10 policy commissions, we have continued to work with the various ministries, departments, and agencies. We are working closely with the federal government on the implementation of the ERGP and the Open Government Partnership, or GP. Just last June, the NESG and the Federal Ministry of Science and Technology, with the support of Heinrich Ball Stiftung, that's Henrik Ball Foundation for you English speakers, convened the Nigerian Renewable Energy Roundtable to galvanize efforts to achieve the federal government's objective of generating 30% of 30 gigawatts of electricity from renewable energy by 2030. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have convened this year to discuss the measures that must be taken to actualize the tri-issues of opportunities, productivity, and employment. We have structured the summit theme on 5 sub-themes that will serve our thematic pillars. Think Nigeria, skills, competencies, and capacity, access to capital, legislation, and economic inclusion. They will drive discussions at our platform. We have also identified sector opportunities that can immediately create opportunities and jobs. They are the nucleus of discussions at our breakout sessions, to which we have allocated more time this year so that they can be more engaging, in-depth, robust, and incisive. We are delighted that our state governors have committed to participate in this year's summit. We had a very successful meeting with the Nigeria Governors Forum last month, and we are currently working on a framework of collaboration with them. Later today, we shall be hosting a working lunch meeting with the state governors. Thank you for coming, sirs. On economic competitiveness and ease of doing business. As we know, every business is a tenant of a state. And we believe that our advocacy for a more globally competitive environment must not be limited to the federal government. The NESG is increasing its focus on state governments that are willing to dialogue with us to address competitiveness and the ease of doing business on the subnational level. Only a robust engagement with the private sector can deliver the inclusive growth that the various state governments strive to attain. We are so delighted to host our partners at the World Economic Forum at this year's summit for a special session on capturing opportunities in the circular economy. During that session, leaders from the public and private sector will convene to discuss a range of issues, including how some of the largest multinationals, in collaboration with government, international organizations, and local business leaders, have been addressing the challenge and opportunity of e-waste. We will also have a side event with the World Bank on domestic revenue mobilization. So, a lot of hard work lies ahead, but Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the NESG is pleased that the first edition of a startups pitching event will hold at this year's summit. This event aims to connect Nigerian entrepreneurs seeking to raise funds with potential investors. The portal for submission of applications was opened on September 1 this year, and by the closing date of September 22nd, 3 weeks later, we had received 263 applications from startups across the length and breadth of the country. The first level screening reduced the number to 31. The adjudication process brought it further down to 11. And the final selection, which required video presentations from them, has given us 8 selected early-stage startups that have been invited to pitch to potential investors and venture capitalists. There will be a jury to select the top 3 startups. We believe that the show of support for small businesses will inspire even greater funding for micro, small, and medium enterprises that are in dire need of capital and mentorship or business advisory services. Let me just take this opportunity to acknowledge our event partners, Venture Capital for Africa, VC4A, Lagos Angel Network, LAN, for providing the support infrastructure to deliver this initiative. We also acknowledge supporting partners Accenture, Banwo and Ighodalo, Templars Law Firm, Olaniwon Ajayi, LP, and Olisa Agbakoba Legal for offering to provide free business and legal advisory services to these selected startups, as well as Ventures Platform. Kola, where are you? Ventures Platform Limited that hosted them in an accelerator in a boot camp here in Abuja to prepare the startups for this event. They have also enrolled in their hub for further mentoring. I want to use this opportunity to invite other corporate organizations to support this initiative and any other similar initiatives by providing capital either as private equity, venture capital, or impact investment to these startups. There is no better way to walk your talk. Your Excellencies, NES 23 Summit participants, on behalf of the board, management, and members of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, we express our gratitude to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, for remaining committed to the public-private dialogue created by the Nigerian Economic Summit. We are also grateful to His Excellency the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, GCON, for his continued support, as espoused by the MC earlier today. I don't know if you drink coffee or it's just water that drives you, sir. I thank everyone present in this hall today and welcome you to the Nigerian Economic Summit 23. Thank you.
This is a public-private partnership. But the beauty of it is that the next speaker who is coming from the public used to be in the private sector. And so he can capture both sides. He's a man that believes that you must be driven by excellence. And you must ask yourself, at the end of each day, each month, each year, and indeed at the end of life, what have you done to the next generation and to your nation? That's what drives him. Therefore, my honor and pleasure to welcome here for providing amazing partnership with NESG, the Honorable Minister of Budget and National Planning. Please welcome Senator Udoma Udo Udoma.
Your Excellency, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, Your Excellency, the Governor of Gombe State and other governors here represented, members of the National Assembly, honorable ministers, the co-chair of the Economic Summit, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. This is a double welcome. You've been welcomed already. I'm just adding my voice. And in that connection, I am also delighted to welcome all of you to the 23rd Nigerian Economic Summit, organized by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, the NESG, in collaboration with my ministry, the Ministry of Budget and National Planning. As you all know, this is an administration that is committed to working with the private sector. And I'm sure that is why people like myself were brought on board. And the administration is committed to working with the private sector in achieving the goal of restructuring the Nigerian economy. It's a goal which President Muhammadu Buhari committed himself to and promised when he was campaigning. And this is why His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, he attended last year's summit in person and has designated His Excellency, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osibajo, to represent him at this year's summit. Since its inception in 1993, the Nigerian Economic Summit has provided a very useful platform for the public sector to engage with the private sector, with our development partners, with academia, with members of civil society, to find ways of working together to achieve faster economic development, and generally to improve the working relationship between the public and the private sector. I attended the very first economic summit, but then, of course, I was a private sector participant. And some of the expectations that we had at that first economic summit are being realized. The working relationship between the public and the private sectors are so much better today, I can assure you, than in 1993. Government now accepts the private sector as partners in economic development. We no longer talk, as we used to in 1993. People no longer talk of the public sector having exclusive dominion of the commanding heights of the economy, from which the private sector is excluded. Instead, government now accepts that the private sector has an important and critical role to play, even in such areas as providing key infrastructure, such as roads and rail. And I'm sure you've heard of a number of initiatives in that direction, in which the private sector is being brought in to provide, and in partnership with the public sector, to provide roads and other infrastructure. And even in managing critical infrastructure, such as airports, ports, petroleum refineries, I'm sure you've also heard of the initiatives in concessioning both the Lagos as well as the Abuja airports. So it's clear that this is an administration that is committed to working with the private sector. Last year's summit was organized at a time the economy was in recession. To get out of recession required our refocusing the economy from reliance on crude oil to enhancing non-oil revenues and the non-oil economy. In short, Your Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we had to quicken the process of changing from a monoculture economy to a diversified, competitive economy. This is something that we have always committed to in Nigeria, but we've never really achieved. And we feel that this is something that should be our focus, and we should achieve it. It should be an economy in which, as His Excellency Mr. President said, we grow what we eat and consume what we make. It was this focus on looking inwards that caused us to choose the theme Made in Nigeria for the 2016 summit. and ensuring that more things are made in Nigeria continues to be the focus of this government. And during my presentation at the 2016 summit last year, I highlighted the various steps government was taking to reflate the economy so as to reverse the contraction of the economy and reposition the economy back onto a path of sustained growth and development. And you will recall, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that as part of that commitment, we released over 1.2 trillion as capital spend for the 2016 budget. And it is gratifying to see that some of these initiatives have contributed to the second quarter performance numbers recently released by the National Bureau of Statistics, which indicate that after 5 quarters of contraction, we have now recorded a small growth of 0.55%. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, whilst this growth is still too small for celebration, it is indeed a signal that we're on the right path. It's also a signal that the economic slide, which started in 2014, has finally stopped, and that we're moving back onto the path of growth. And even more importantly, from the NBS numbers on investment flows, it is clear that private sector confidence in the Nigerian economy is coming back. Because that is critical. It is the confidence that drives this economy, that brings investment. And the numbers show that confidence is coming back into this economy. And Your Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you will also recall that in my presentation at last year's summit, I assured you that we were at that time working on a comprehensive medium-term plan which would bring together all the economic initiatives of government. This plan, titled the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan 2017 to 2020, was completed in the early part of this year and was launched by His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari on the 5th of April this year. Right from my university days, I've always been interested in development economics. I've always been interested on the issue of why some countries are poor and what is required to make them grow and become prosperous. Since the time of Adam Smith, there have been thousands of publications on the issue, and theories of development are legion. However, whatever their differences, development economists agree that for a country to prosper, there must be an increase in the level of national output. That is it. There must be an increase in the level of national output. And this explains why we considered our Made in Nigeria focus as critical to our turnaround. And the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, therefore, includes that concept, that inward concept, made in Nigeria, looking at what we can produce, turning the country from principally a consuming to a producing nation. However, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan is more than this. It sets out in a single document our comprehensive strategy for increasing our national productivity and output in order to achieve our objective of a prosperous economy, providing maximum welfare for all our citizens. Our aim, simply put, is to achieve a growth rate of 7% by the year 2020. And thereafter, we want to continue on that trajectory so that we can ultimately reach 10% growth rate in succeeding years. Because it is at that level of growth that really we can make the sort of major impact that we want for this country. It is at that sort of growth that we can achieve our ultimate aim, which is to become a regional, industrial, and commercial powerhouse. And we can achieve it. We can do it. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the ERGP is a product of extensive consultations. I therefore wish to express our appreciation to all those of you who contributed towards the development of this plan, and many of you are here. We worked together on this plan. The ERGP is a product of public-private sector partnership. I also thank members of the public, as well as our development partners, for the various supportive comments on the plan. And there have been a lot of very, very supportive comments, for which we are very appreciative. However, many of you have, while commending the plan, you've expressed concerns about whether it will be properly implemented, given Nigeria's past record with previous plans. And I appreciate these concerns. But I can assure you that this government is committed to the faithful implementation of the plan. It is for this reason that this year's summit is dedicated to the implementation of the ERGP. We cannot and we must not allow it to fail. In our interests and the interests of future generations of Nigerians. At this summit, we will therefore be expecting the active participation of all the private sector persons gathered here in reviewing and strengthening our implementation strategies. Indeed, we are gathered here so as to give an opportunity for this gathering of captains of industry and influential members of the private sector to contribute towards the effective implementation of the ERGP. And distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to make it easy for all of you, we have produced an abridged version of this plan. And this will be distributed to everybody here so that you should have it with you throughout this summit session. As my co-chair said, you've come here to work. On our part, as a government, we are ensuring that our annual budgets are aligned with the ERGP so that government spending is driven by the plan. It's very important. They must be driven by the plan. In addition, we have set up a special implementation unit to ensure effective delivery of the plan, and we've also engaged staff to drive that process. In the coming weeks, we will be running sector-focused Malaysian-style labs. These labs are intended to bring all relevant stakeholders, whether in the public or private sectors, together. We will assemble, we'll come together into weeks, because this is hard work, weeks of intensive working sessions to brainstorm on practical steps to overcoming any identified challenges in the selected area. The central objective of these labs will be to bring in private capital to finance projects across the country. And you'll be hearing more about these labs because we'll be inviting many of you to participate in these labs. And some of the staff that we have recruited who are going to organize these labs are going to be here at this summit. And they will be available to interact with you, give you more information on the proposed labs, and give you more information on our implementation initiatives. Because this is truly a partnership. We want to work with you. So they're going to be here, they will introduce themselves, and we will organize these labs. We're also retaining some consultants who are going to help us to organize the labs. And these labs are going to help us to generate private sector funding for a lot of our initiatives. Because as you know, public sector funding is limited. So we have to work together to achieve these objectives. So it is in that spirit of partnership that I welcome all of you to the 23rd Nigerian Economic Summit. And I look forward to a very productive engagement in the next 3 days. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you too, Honorable Minister. We appreciate you. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the Inside Session is a new thing in the 23-year editions of the Nigerian Economic Summit. It is new for NES 23. And why? Because we shall be looking at the issue of Nigeria from two perspectives, the creative and poetic on one side, and then the logical and numbers on the other. So our first speaker is the poet. He is the son of one of Nigeria's writers and senators. He is Nigeria's most prolific performance poet. He is a spoken word and poetic performance person. An award-winning author. He has written about 8 books. A natural and gifted storyteller. But he's also bohemian. If you hear what he call creative orthodoxy, that's who he is. So before I call him, let me also formally welcome His Excellency the Governor of Gombe State, Alhaji Ibrahim Hassan Dakwambo. I'd like to welcome you very specially. And also here the Deputy Governor of Ogun State, Mrs. Yetunde Onanuga. Your Excellency, you're welcome. So Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, his views are likely going to be very different. The way he's dressing is also different. Please welcome DK Chukwumerije. You can see the man. But he believes in Nigeria. I welcome you, DK.
Thank you. I didn't know if that was a compliment or just... I'm a poet, so I'm going to begin with lines from a poem written by the Irish poet W.B. Yeats and popularized by our own Chinua Achebe. Things fall apart, and the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the land. Things fall apart, and the center cannot hold. And I start with those lines because I want to ask, why are things in such danger of falling apart in the country today? The answer is an open secret. Every time you look at our coat of arms, it's right over there, you will see the answer to that question. It's written under our coat of arms. We call it the Nigerian Motto, and it says, unity and faith, peace and progress. Unity and faith, peace and progress. Unity and faith, because it is difficult to preach unity if you're not also offering faith. The unity of the country feels like it's under threat today because too many Nigerians have lost and are losing faith in the nation. Why is this happening? The answer is sad, but relatively straightforward. where you have a soldier that has paid the ultimate price defending the territorial sovereignty of the country, perhaps in the northeast. And afterwards, the government struggles for one reason or the other to care for the widow and orphans he's left behind. People lose faith. If you have a Nigerian that has graduated from university with a 2-1 or a first class, and it's pounding the streets of Lagos and Abuja, but cannot find a job because of federal character, quota system, tribalism, nepotism, people lose faith. If you have a mother that takes her child to the hospital and must watch that child die because that government hospital is on strike, or if it's not on strike, it has no drugs, or if it has drugs, she has to pay the full market price for treatment up front before they would consider this child, and she must then watch that child die in the corridor. People lose faith. And when people lose faith in the state, they take solace in the tribe, because the tribe is the natural enemy of the state. When people lose faith in the state, they take refuge in the tribe. And as more and more people take refuge in the tribe, they begin to trouble the peace of the nation, unity and faith, peace and progress. So how do you defend the peace of a nation that is being troubled in these ways? Not by bullets or bombs, but by bringing progress to the people. For it is that progress that restores the faith of the people in the state. For when the Nigerian passport, when the green, white, green becomes a valid ticket to a better life, people will rush to embrace the Nigerian identity. So I am a poet. I'm constrained as an individual. I can only preach one Nigeria with my mouth. But the Nigerian state cannot be seen preaching one Nigeria only with its mouth. No. It must preach one Nigeria with its architects and its builders, with its teachers and its extension workers. It must preach one Nigeria by building roads and bridges and hospitals and railroads. It must preach one Nigeria by bringing a progress that is inclusive to all, to Nigerians. Unity and faith, peace and progress. So that now, in this time of heightened ethno-religious tensions, the need for good governance and economic inclusion has never been higher. Because in the last 20 to 25 years, driven basically by worsening socioeconomic conditions, we have seen violent fronts open up all over the country. We have seen a militancy take root in the South-South, an insurgency take root in the Northeast. If this trend continues, how many more fronts may open in the next 20 to 25 years? At how many fronts can the Nigerian state fight simultaneously? Therefore, the issue of good governance and economic inclusion has become an existential one for our nation. If we are not able to turn the tide and begin to effectively deliver a better life to Nigerians across board, then it is only a question of time before the Nigerian state begins to buckle under the increasing weights of these multiplying socioeconomic contradictions. But there is hope. In South Africa, in the aftermath of the collapse of apartheid, people predicted chaos and bloodshed. Those predictions did not come to pass, chiefly because of the decision of one man to stand up for the common good of all South Africans, white or black. We need the same thing to happen here. We need our government to commit to stand up for the common good of all Nigerians, regardless of faith, tribe, political affiliation. We need a government that will commit to investing, for instance, in infrastructure for all, investing in the roads that unite, in the bridges that bind, in the railways that connect, investing in our unity schools as they were meant to be, in the NYSC as it was meant to be, investing in creating heroes out of our sporting champions who daily demonstrate on the field of struggle that victory has nothing to do with faith and ethnicity and everything to do with hard work and tenacity. If we have a government that invests in these things, then there is hope. If you have a government that is committed to investing in providing jobs for our youths, affordable credit for our startup businesses, so that people feel that they have a stake in society, for those who have houses and cars of their own, are less likely to go out on the street to burn the houses and cars of others. If you have a government committed to investing in equal economic opportunities for all Nigerians, then there is hope. If you have a government committed to investing in laws that are certain and knowable in advance, in a justice that is blind to the power, the wealth, the political office, the faith, the ethnicity of those who stand before it, so that Nigerians know that action A will attract consequence B, regardless of who you are, then there is hope. If we will invest in commit to invest in a language of inclusion, in alternative interpretations of our own history and social realities, so that Nigerians see that poverty does not discriminate between North and South, that armed robbers do not obey the federal character principle. And when the River Niger bursts its banks, it does not just flood the homes of Muslims and non-indigents, that devastation does not discriminate, and the only way we can tackle it is by pulling together. If we can invest in narratives like this, then there is hope. Because that center, in those lines, things fall apart and the center cannot hold. That center is the commitment of the government to the common good, to the common wealth of this nation. Now, I am not the government, I'm just a poet. So I can only contribute my poems to this struggle for economic inclusion, for social justice and national integration. So I'm going to leave you this morning with a poem titled, The Wall and the Bridge. If a white man turned and called me nigger, my blood would boil in righteous anger, for the evil of discrimination is clearly established when a white man tries to treat me like rubbish. But if Hausas say Igbos are greedy and crude, and Igbos say Hausas are haughty and rude, and Ijaw says the Shekiri must die today, and Ezra tells Zulu there is no other way. If Yorubas declare it is Awo or nothing, and we use federal character to share everything, so before you can even smile and tell me welcome, you must first ask me where my father is from. If those who were settlers but now indigents say those who are settlers can't become indigents, and the Constitution says we are all citizens, local governments keep issuing certificates of origin. If my brother passed JAM but can't go to uni because he is Tiv and he's not Kanuri, and UniMaid has a quota for its catchment area, so he must go back to Benue or wait 1 more year. If it's okay to say it's not okay to marry someone just because they are Kalabari and that every tribe should have its own side, are we not then practicing apartheid? If you cannot buy land unless you're a native and cannot find work unless you're a native and cannot feel safe unless you're a native, how can we then say we're not primitive? Yet, you go to London and get your passport, then settle wherever, however you want. You stand there and fight for equality, but come back and start to use ethnicity. I don't get the logic of thinking it's different, to be tribalistic and then to be racist. If you're happy to judge him just hearing his name, whatever you call it, my friend, is the same. Where there is no courage to cross this divide, where there is no faith to look deep inside, and stop judging accents and surnames and dressing, this fire we're quenching will only keep burning. Which nation can stand dividing its people? How can one build on foundation so brittle? If we cannot see ourselves in each other, this journey ends here, we're going no further. For when God made man, he gave him no facial marks. He did not make Bagi, Okun, or Angas. As sure as a black man is just like a white man, no culture is older than being human. This is the truth until we accept it. Our nation will stumble on its broken feet. For the same things can bind us that drive us apart. For the wall and the bridge are both in the heart. Thank you very much.
DK Cable. Can we put our hands together one more time for this amazing? Thank you. Beautifully, poetically presenting the issues that confront us as a nation. It might sound sweet and beautiful and breezy, but those are stark realities. Those are stark realities. And now you've heard the artistic side. Let me quickly go to Mackenzie Achaleke is here. You might not like if you don't like numbers. Please welcome him to the podium.
Good morning. I am not a poet, but I'll try to share some numbers. Can we have the presentation, please? Your Excellency, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Your Excellencies, governors here present, members of the National Assembly, honorable ministers, chairman of NESG and board members, captains of industry, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. What I've been asked to do is to quickly just set the context for this 23rd summit, so we're on the same page, leading on into our deliberations over the next 3 days. So what we do very quickly is talk a bit about the recap of some of the context, not just in Nigeria, but across the continent. We'll then talk about the economic recovery plan that the Honorable Minister has spoken so eloquently about very quickly, but more importantly, what has happened since we launched the plan. And then talk about an imperative for public and private, for more public and private collaboration for us to accelerate this momentum, which is what we need as a country. So quickly, on the context, this is not, very quickly, let's talk about Africa as a continent, right? So as we know, growth has slowed down. We used to be the second fastest growing region in the world. Over the last 5, 6, 7 years, we dropped to the third fastest growing region in the world. And that's as a whole continent. Now, if we think about why that is, and first, you know, it's 54 countries, so when we talk about Africa, we need to realize that we need to be a lot more granular. If we look at 3 different sets of countries, the first are the Arab Spring countries, the countries in the north that went through the Arab Spring. Those countries used to grow at about 5% a year up until 2010, and growth has gone to 0, right? So they're not growing at all, and that has dragged down the average. If you then look at the oil exporters like us, like in Algeria, like Angola, growth in those countries has actually halved, right? And that has also dragged down the average. But if you then look at the rest of the continent, they've actually, despite the slowdown around the world, the rest of the continent has accelerated the growth from 4% to about 4.5%, right? So even despite these conditions and the things we can learn to continue to drive growth across Nigeria. Now, why is that, right? And really the 4 headwinds, and I think we all know, one is the oil price, right? Oil prices have collapsed, and that has affected us big time. The slowdown in capital flows is good to see that it's starting to pick up again here in Nigeria, but that had slowed down. The broader slowdown in growth in emerging markets, not just in China, but across the world, and that has affected both the demand for some of our natural resources, but also supply of capital, which we received quite a bit of in the past. And then some of the insecurity concerns that we know we face here in Nigeria, but also across Africa. Now, what has that then done to us as a continent? First, you'll see growth on the x-axis is growth from 2000 to 2010. On the y-axis is growth from 2010 to 2015. And as I said earlier, there are a number of countries that actually have accelerated the growth, right? So, you know, the Ghanas, the Cote d'Ivoires, the Ethiopias, the Rwandas, these are countries, despite these conditions, are still growing at 8 to 9% a year. There are a number of countries that have decelerated the growth, right? But more importantly for us is that the top 6 economies on the continent, which account for about 60% of our GDP, growth has slowed down, right? So it's not just in Nigeria, but it's also in South Africa, it is in Algeria, it's in Angola, it's in Morocco, and it's in Egypt, right? Growth has slowed down. So that's what's happening across Africa. If we come to Nigeria specifically, as we know, we went through a period of the financial crisis, did affect us. We then started recovering, and growth started picking up. And then we went through a period of recession. Now, very quickly, through that, as we said, growth slowed down, but all of the macroeconomic indicators, as we know, right? So deficit got worse, exchange rate, we started to see the divergence in the exchange rates, and we also started to see inflation tick up quite a bit. Now, part of the challenge we face as a country is that, even though we've been able to diversify our economy, and oil only accounts for about 8% of our economy today, we're struggling to monetize that, right? So it's 8% of the economy, but it accounts for 40% of revenues. So the other 92% of the economy, we need to figure out a better way to monetize that so we can generate revenue from it. In addition, the good news is we've actually been able to quite significantly increase our non-oil revenues, right? We've grown non-oil revenue 16% year on year over the last 10 years, to offset also the drop in oil price and oil revenues. But despite that, we're still struggling on the fiscal side, right? We're still low when it comes to tax to GDP. So we've grown non-oil revenue, tax, and customs, but we still have a long way to go. Now, in addition to that, even in our periods of strong economic growth, and this was in the 2000s when we were growing very strongly at 8 to 9%, we really struggled to translate growth into development, right? And that's an issue we have as a country. We struggled to translate. You see other countries who were growing were able to reduce poverty rates. We struggled to translate growth into development. And as such, we look at our human development indicators, and on a number of dimensions, the human development indicators, where it's maternal mortality, where there's a number of children out of school, the highest in the world, over 60% of them are girls, whether it's life expectancy, where it's lower than the average across Africa in Nigeria today, whether it's number of people with not access to potable water or to electricity. On all of these indicators, we have a long way to go, right? In a context of, as one of the speakers said earlier, our population is growing, right? The latest reports show that we could hit 800 million people by the end of the century, right? So again, bold actions need to be taken to get there. So what has happened in the past year? As we know, the minister has started to spoke quite a bit about it, right? So we launched the Economic Recovery Plan. It's based on 3 pillars, right? Investing in our people, restoring growth, and building a competitive economy. We then also have the right enablers in place to do that, and as the Honorable Minister talked about, the delivery to make sure that this happens. Now, I won't go through, you have the summary of the ERGP. It's structured around 12 key initiatives and 5 strategic thrusts. We won't go through them quickly. You'll see it in the document. What's more important for us as a technical team when we started to reflect on what has happened since then is that there's been some good news. The feedback first on the ERGP has actually been very positive, whether it's from the media or some of our development partners. The feedback has actually been very positive. And everybody said, look, this is the right plan, but we need to make sure that it gets delivered. And what has then happened from a delivery side? First, as we talked about, we actually went through, a tough period as a country. We bottomed up, and we talk about we're out of recession now, but that started at the beginning of the year. You can see how GDP growth started to improve, and we are now out of recession, which is a good sign. In addition to that, our oil production has increased and stabilized. We're close to 2 million barrels a day, which is very important for an economy like ours, which is still highly dependent on oil revenue. Our external reserves have increased quite a bit over the last few months as well, which is always helpful. And the exchange rate is converging, right? So quite a bit of progress over the last few months since the plan was launched. The efficiency unit is yielding results, right? We saved over 200 billion naira through the efficiency unit, which has been quite helpful for us as a country. And it's getting easier to do business in Nigeria, right? So getting access to visas, this is a tweet that somebody sent out about how it was easy for him to get his visa. We can register a business name in 1 day. We've spoken about, e-filing for tax, that's working now. The National Collateral Registry is also working. So it's starting to get easier for businesses to operate in the country. And the National Assembly, thank you again, the National Assembly members here present, has played a key role in passing some of these bills. We've spoken about the Credit Report Act, the Movable Assets Registry, and the other bills that are in the process, especially the Omnibus Bill, which is all about ease of doing business, right? So the National Assembly has played a key role working with the public sector and the private sector to deliver on all of this. Having said that, we still have, if I can get the next slide, we still have a long way to go. So as a technical committee, we reflected on the 12 areas of the ERGP to see where are we today We would argue that there are two areas that are green, right, on ease of doing business and on increased oil production. We would argue that there are probably 2 or 3 that are still red, where we need to really see more progress around privatizing assets, around private financing for infrastructure, and around refining for self-sufficiency. And the others will say, you know, we're getting there, it's more yellow, right? So again, it's early days, but still a lot to be done to accelerate the momentum. And just finally, to quickly end with where we believe public and private sector need to come together even more to drive, to accelerate this momentum. 5 areas. 1 is on jobs, 2 on infrastructure, 3 on diversifying our economy, 4 is on the social services, and 5 is on delivery. So just quickly on jobs, we all know that we have a jobs problem and an unemployment problem in the country today. Part of the issue we have in general across Africa is that the sectors that deliver jobs are different from the ones that deliver growth, right? So resources tend to deliver a lot of growth, but it doesn't employ a lot of people. The sectors that drive jobs are more agriculture, retail, and wholesale trade, and those are the ones we need to accelerate. And so what we need to do there is really focus on these subsectors, work with the public sector and the private sector, work across the value chains that we create jobs, and make sure we have access to financing, we have the right infrastructure in place, the right business environment, and the right skills in place to deliver on this. So that's one of the key priorities where we need to work together. The second area is on infrastructure, right? This came from the work we did on the infrastructure master plan. On average, countries with good infrastructure have a 70% infrastructure stock to GDP ratio. In Nigeria, today we're still about 20–25%, so quite low. A lot needs to be done. We just took one metric. If you look at the World Bank's PPP database, in there, you know, as Nigeria only listed as 1 project, and there it may not be the right number, but still a long way to go to get PPPs, to deliver, to do more PPPs and do them quickly in the country. And so again here, a lot needs to be done from the private sector and the public sector working together. Private sector has to provide a lot of the financing, the public sector has to provide the enabling environment. We need to make sure we have the right capabilities and skills in place to deliver on these projects. So again, a lot of need for public and private sector collaboration in infrastructure. On manufacturing, again, same if you look at countries as manufacturing as percentage of GDP, we today are about 10%, right? A long way to go in diversifying our economy beyond oil and gas. Countries like Ethiopia have done an amazing job over quite a short period of time to really drive the manufacturing sector by setting up these special economic zones that work, right? We have them here, but we need to get them to work. So again, this is where business and government have to come together to drive the diversification across a number of areas around productivity. But more importantly, I guess, for us in Nigeria is really about making sure that we set up these manufacturing hubs in this industrial zone, that it works properly, right? Not just on paper, but that it works properly. So a lot to be done between the public and private sector on the manufacturing front. In social services, same here. We just looked at health expenditure in GDP compared to other African countries, again on the public sector side and on the private sector side. Again, huge room for growth. And this is where it's not just the public and the private sector, the donors also play a key role here in helping us achieve better outcomes for our people on health and on education, right? So again, here we need to see a lot more collaboration between public and private sector. And then finally in delivery, the Honorable Minister talked a lot about the delivery. We actually had a whole cabinet retreat focused just on delivery, the clear steps that need to be taken for us to deliver on the ERGP and all of our projects. We would argue that the 5 things that need to happen in Nigeria today, we need to have these detailed action plans, hence the labs, which are going to get going. We need to build capabilities of our people to deliver on this. We need to hold people accountable, right? Make sure there's consequence management for people when they don't deliver. We need to make sure there's better collaboration between federal and state. It has to, you know, a lot of it happens at the state level. And finally, we need to make sure we communicate effectively. Right, and again here, the private sector has a key role to play in supporting the government to ensure delivery, right? Whether it's providing financial support, whether it's a knowledge exchange and best practices. We've seen some secondments that have been very, very helpful to the public sector. Whether it's capability building, or whether it's actually holding the government accountable in sessions like this, holding government accountable to what they promise. And if we're able to deliver on all of this, the good news is hopefully we can get to the point where we can be celebrating the fact that we've achieved not 7%, but potentially double-digit growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Echaleke. He's from Cameroon, but he understands the setting in the Nigerian system. And now we shall be kicking off with our first, or the opening plenary, as it were. Let me welcome our moderator, Ms. Kadaria Ahmed, Director of Daria Media Limited, to step forward to the podium. Kadaria, welcome you. Thank you very much. And these are members of the panel. Let me welcome the Vice Chairman, GE, Mr. John Rice. And the man who gave the world Afri-capitalism, empowering thousands of African youths and deploying them into entrepreneurship. The chairman of Hairs Holdings, Mr. Tony Elumelu, is also here. And so, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, joining this panel is our energetic, hardworking Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Please welcome Professor Yemi Oshibajo, SON, GCON. We remove one, remove this. Remove one seat, so move over there.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. The way I want to structure the conversation is that we will have a chat with the Vice President and the panelists, but I will try and make out time for the audience to actually engage with the panel and to ask questions. We're looking at about 30 minutes for that, but we will have a conversation before we do that. And I'd like to set the context a little bit for the conversation we're going to have by talking to you about what is thought to be a reversal in globalization that's taking place as a result of political happenings in the United States and, of course, in Europe. Political and business leaders are confronted with a landscape that has redefined or is redefining the concept of globalization. It is true that international trade and investment remains borderless, but there is a growing demand for and an emphasis on localization. Socioeconomic pressures in many parts of the world crystallized, like I said, in political results during the last year as public disaffection with the status quo gained traction. We saw Brexit and we saw the election of President Donald Trump in the United States. In Italy, we saw the electorate reject Matteo Renzi's constitutional reforms. Now, the implications of these sort of changes are far-reaching for Nigeria because there are those who believe the West has reached a tipping point and may now embark on a period of deglobalization and maybe even protectionism. But of course, this has not been a Western phenomenon alone. We've seen similar events taking place in Brazil, the Philippines, and Turkey. So does Nigeria need to start strategically repositioning itself in terms of investments, trade, and policy for this emerging new global order? Should we begin to focus on adapting to local needs in the form of jobs, technology, and generally adding value to human and natural resources for the local economy? Some businesses, and I'm happy we've got the gentleman from GE here, though they're linked across countries, have started talking about localization, which essentially means producing and innovating in the place where you sell. The Nigerian Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, I'm told, has committed the federal government to working with the private sector to adopt localization as the strategy for choice. And it is here that I'd like to start our conversation. Mr. Vice President, if I may ask, what does this mean specifically? What exactly does this plan contain that is focusing on localization as we understand it?
Well, I think, as you probably heard, the plan focuses on, there are three pillars: investing in our people, creating a globally competitive economy.
Should I give you my mic?
Perhaps that. Okay, thank you. Investing in our people, creating a globally competitive economy, and restoring growth. Part of restoring growth, of course, is the attempt to ensure that we're able to produce most of what, well, maybe not most of what we consume, but a lot of what we consume, focusing on our strengths. The point, of course, is that productivity is what will drive growth for us. And our productivity, has largely in the country. I mean, when you look at growth, you'll find that the growth figures usually just reflect what we're earning from resources. So it's always been resource-based. But now we're looking more at productivity, we're looking more at manufacturing, we're looking more at agriculture and the agro-allied value chain. So for us, it's really more a focus on those things that will drive productivity, aside from just the resource-based type of growth that we've seen in the past.
Now, I took a quick look at the plan, and generally, when you're talking about productivity, you're talking about things like skill sets, so the ability of people to actually do the job. So capacity building, you're looking at the cost of capital, and I think it has been mentioned, and access to capital as well. And we're also looking at infrastructure. And yet, we talk about these things almost as if they are quick fixes. I kind of haven't seen any concerted effort, for example, to talk about overhauling education, which is the basis for building skills and getting people to work.
Well, I think that there's a lot that's going on. There's a lot that's going on. And again, just as you've spoken, it's difficult to cover the whole range of what is going on. But I want to say that if you look at what's going on in infrastructure, for example, it's clear that we need adequate infrastructure to be able to drive the growth that we're talking about. And so we're investing heavily in railways. We're investing, for example, I'm sure you're aware that the Lagos-Kano rail project is on. The concessioning of the narrow gauge, Lagos-Kano narrow gauge is one that we're working with General Electric. And that's a huge project, and we expect that it will be driven by cargo transportation. We're also doing the Lagos-Calabar as well. So there's quite a bit of focus on infrastructure. We're also, as you've heard, concessioning our ports. We're building the road networks. We're rebuilding practically all of the road networks. We're investing, as you've heard, on infrastructure alone. Our capital spend was close to ₦1 trillion. So there's quite a bit of work going on infrastructure. Now, with respect to developing education and skills, with respect to developing skills, there are several initiatives. Overhauling the entire educational system is a long-term one. And of course, we have a plan to do that. If you look at even the recovery and growth plan, that is clearly there. But that's a much more long-term thing. In the short term, we're looking at vocational education. And we're ramping up vocational education in various institutions. The Ministry of Education has been mandated to look at how relevant vocational education, especially with private sector involvement. There is some work that we're doing, especially in the power sector, with Siemens, for example. They have a power academy. There's some work going on there looking at how to develop middle cadre competence in the power sector. We're also looking at how to develop middle cadre building skills. You know, Dangote is working with us on an academy in that respect as well. There's a need for some quick fixes. There's a need to quickly fill the gaps, especially in industry that is growing quickly. But there's also a long-term plan that really has to just go through its normal course, and you really can't speed that up in any significant way. It just has to run its course.
Thank you. If I could, Mr. John Rice, GE has talked about the fact that it is looking at localizing operations. In Nigeria, what does that mean?
Well, for us, we've been localizing various aspects of our operations for the last 10 years. Most recently, the construction of a state-of-the-art facility in Calabar, which supports our power business and will support our oil and gas business over the next few years. And on the whole subject of localization, I'd say one thing is very, very important, and that is that the government outlined very specific objectives and requirements, and then hold us and other companies that are active in the country accountable for that. We do business in 180 countries around the world, and the ones that have clear expectations and allow businesses to align themselves accordingly get more investment. And it's a simple fact. We understand the role that we have to play in developing the economy. We accept that. What we want is a clear agenda from the government, which I think we have, and then an expectation that everyone will be held to the same set of rules. And when we get that, we're like any other investor. If we can see the long term and it looks positive, we'll invest more.
Mr. Elumelu, as someone who works to build and nurture entrepreneurs and is also making linkages between African countries when it comes to business and talking about impact investment, what does localization mean to you? What should it be?
So localization to me is a bottom-up entrepreneurial approach to development. Development that brings inclusiveness, development that helps to create jobs, and development that helps to truly diversify an economy. And what I see is, or what I expect us to appreciate and emphasize further, is that localization is synonymous with the growth of SMEs. SMEs, to a large extent, are the lifeblood of every economy. And for us to grow our economy, we must emphasize this sector more significantly. And talking about SMEs starts from our youth. We have a lot of people who are enterprising, creative, across all sectors, who are prepared to work if the opportunities present themselves. And so localization should seek to integrate everyone, should seek to create jobs, should seek to make sure that the hope and faith that was talked about before is restored. We need to see growth that is not on paper, but growth that is actually fed by our people. And this comes when our SMEs are integrated into our development agenda.
Mr. Vice President, specifically responding to the issues, yes, he talked about in terms of inclusive growth, which, Asha in his presentation also alluded to, the fact that we can grow but not have development. You talked about short fixes and you talked about long-term growth. I want to begin by focusing on the short fixes. In your view, what are the things, the policies that you've put in place to enable short fixes for SMEs, to bring them in quickly on board and to grow them because they are the engine of growth?
First, in the past year, we have worked on a number of initiatives. The first is a set of executive orders, which were meant, specifically to drive productivity in one way or the other. The first was an executive order which mandated government agencies, especially the regulatory agencies, to ensure that they are able to deliver on their specific mandates within timeframes. So, for example, the Corporate Affairs Commission was required to be able to give registration for businesses within 24 hours, in some cases within 48 hours. We set timelines for specific regulatory agencies to be able to deliver on their mandates. Another was with respect to local content. So the second executive order was one that said that government agencies, the MDAs, must patronize local products as an obligation. Now, that meant that the first order of business for a government agency in a procurement will be to look out for local products before looking elsewhere. And that was also, one of the important mandates that the executive orders produced. So, in effect, we ensured that we worked with the government agencies to ensure that they're able to deliver on their own mandates. But the other thing, and perhaps more important, is what we did with the MSMEs. We had a series of what we call the MSME Clinics. And I personally went to about 7 states with regulatory agencies, with the NAFDAC, with SON, with FRS, with BOI. We went to several states to meet with MSMEs and to talk to the MSMEs and interact with them. Basically, the whole idea was to introduce the regulatory agencies in a new light, that they're actually meant to be facilitators of business, not obstacles to business. And in many states, they've now set up offices so that the MSMEs can quickly approach them and interact with them whenever they have the need to do so. So in many senses, we've been very hands-on about our engagement, especially with the MSMEs. Yes.
If I may say so, it sounds really good. But in many ways, there are those who will say these are cosmetic changes. And if you don't address the fundamentals, it is very hard to see how you can ramp up productivity, at least in such a way that you have a quantum change in terms of just growth that is inclusive as we want. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I'd say that that's absolutely wrong. Certainly there's nothing cosmetic about ensuring that businesses are registered within 28 or 48 hours with proof. There's nothing cosmetic about ensuring that NAFDAC is able to deliver on its mandate within a given time frame. And there's absolutely nothing cosmetic about going to the MSMEs themselves, having them interact directly with the regulators. And obviously there's nothing cosmetic also about ensuring that we're able to provide the best environment for all of these MSMEs and businesses to grow. For example, if you look at agriculture, and the sheer number of farmers that have come on board and the whole agro-allied value chain, and the enthusiasm of industry, especially, when you look at the number of rice mills that are now, in production, look at the number of fertilizer mills. The sheer range of businesses that are coming on stream. I think that enthusiasm itself and what you're seeing in actual numbers shows you that there is nothing cosmetic about what is going on. It's very real, and the figures and all of the evidence is there to see.
Mr. Elumelu, the same question, please.
So I agree with the Vice President that there's progress, especially in the area of some improvement in the area of ease of doing business, but there's room for improvement. I interact with this young entrepreneur, the SMEs, through the Tony Melo Foundation program. We have about 1,500 Nigerians who are beneficiaries of this, and they're all in the SME space. They tell me, they talk about tax issues. They talk about ease of business and cooperation. Most importantly, they talk about poor access to electricity. They talk about transportation difficulties. So I've seen, talking to them, some improvement in the area of business registration, as the Vice President rightly captured, and some other areas there. But they can't make progress if we do not have improved access to electricity. And this, in fairness to everyone, is a comprehensive and collective responsibility. However, we need the government to help set, again, get the market power system, especially to be market-driven, the policies, the understanding that attracted investment to that sector. We need to push it and make sure it's getting to the point where it operates almost on its own. Right now, government has been doing a lot, coming to build the system out. There's currently $700 billion on the table. The point is it will be exhausted someday, and what happens after it's exhausted? So we need to look at it more holistically, more long-term, and deal with the issue. I know there are challenges in the sector, and government should deal with this challenge so that the market becomes self-sustaining, and then we can have electricity. If we fix electricity in Nigeria, we fix most of these issues. SMEs will succeed, social sector will do well, big businesses will grow. It's one that cuts across all sectors. And I believe that for government, maybe you prioritize a few key things. Ease of doing business, power, transportation, security as they're doing, and just fix this, and I believe this country will take off fully.
Now, Mr. Rice, often when we talk about these things, they seem like big headline issues, and they are perennial problems that have faced Nigeria time and time again. In your experience as someone who's trying to localize, and you've committed to the idea of localization on an ideological level in Nigeria, but you're also operating in other countries, what are the challenges that you face that are specific to this particular market?
Well, first of all, I'd agree with some of the earlier comments. There's been a lot of progress made around the ease of doing business in Nigeria. I've been coming here for 15 years, and I've seen real improvements. But there are a lot of frictional costs that still exist. You know, the customs processes are quite complicated and seem to be arbitrary. And there's lots of factors that contribute to that, but those are things. We did a fast power project last year, shipped the units about a year ago, and we're just now getting them through the customs process. And that's the fast power project. So it's our responsibility to facilitate improvements. But if you benchmark against, you know, Hong Kong or Singapore or there's other countries to look at in terms of the speed and accountability that goes with that. And as an overarching comment, I'd say that many governments with the right intention don't always measure the bureaucracies on speed. And in this world, when you have 190 million people in this great country that need basics, infrastructure, electricity, healthcare, you can't wait forever, right? So speed has to be a dimension in everything that we do, right? We measure ourselves on speed, and we're accountable for speed, and when we make commitments to our customers or to governments, we hold ourselves accountable for meeting those commitments in the time frame that's been established. And nothing less matters, okay? So, and one more point I'd make on capacity building, because Tony made referenced it. It's so important, and when it gets back to localization, when we talk about localization, everybody focuses on the size of the investment and the number of jobs that we're going to start with. Nobody ever says, well, what is your training budget? How much are you going to spend on developing people? How will you help develop your supply chain? Because all of those factors will determine whether the plant that we start that has 150 people grows to 300 or shrinks to 0. If we're not building capacity, we shrink, and if we are, we grow. And so for me, it's important that headline number is an investment number on day one. You're going to have 150 people. You're going to spend $50 million. But nobody asks about the training budget. And that will determine the success of whatever we localize in whatever country we localize it.
Now, Mr. Vice President, just listening to Mr. Rice there, we're doing ease of doing business, everybody accepts is doing well, but we don't seem to be doing very well in terms of the bureaucracy. He made mention of the customs, for example, and the convoluted nature of bringing in things. And so my question to you is, what are the things in your view that make us competitive and allow us to attract localized businesses in this changing world where globalization may not be on the retreat, but at least is on a freeze?
Okay. Let me say first that with respect to the bureaucracies, just as Mr. Rice pointed out, I think that there is, he's right that we need to do a lot more work with the customs. And this is one of the priorities that we've set, even with the 70-day action plan. Now, we have what is called a single window, which is what we're working on at the moment with the MPA, the customs, and all the other regulatory agencies, so that you have a single window, which is what happens in all other parts of the world. So you have a single window process for both export and import and all of that. And you then reduce all of the participants in the customs process. And we've worked quite well on that, and I believe that we should be able to see considerable progress in the next few months, especially as the single window comes on stream. So I think we will deal with that. And it's important when we talk about bureaucracy to really unpack it, because all of the issues that we're addressing in the ease of doing business essentially are bureaucratic. And really what we're trying to do is to remove the layers of bureaucracy that have been there for years and years. And this is really the point we've made with practically every one of the steps. And that's why, you know, customs is also a part of it and a very important part of it. And that's the way we want to address it. I think that those are the ways by which we intend to be globally competitive. It is by removing the bureaucracies, making it easier for business to be done in this environment. You know, the bureaucracies around all sorts of pre-investment approvals, creating the right incentives, ensuring we give the right incentives, ensuring that it's easy for people, just as Mr. Rice has said, to bring in their imports and export also as quickly and as efficiently as possible. That's the whole purpose of the Presidential Enabling Council on doing business. That's what we're focused on doing practically every day. And that's why we've launched the next phase of it, which, as I've said, includes the customs bit. Yes.
Mr. Elumelu, we are putting things in place, but again, we still largely have a workforce, even though they're young, they're highly unskilled. We're not seeing programs on the sort of scale that is likely to, if you like, turn things around in the short term very quickly. What are your views on becoming competitive and not just attracting companies like GE and encouraging them to come and produce here and innovate here, but also building capacity of local businesses to produce, compete internally, and maybe be able to export?
The truth is, we can't make much progress as a country if we don't prioritize our youth. If we don't, I keep coming back to this because it's so critical. We're a country vastly endowed, natural resources, and most importantly, in terms of population. And this population, the demographic, could be very positive. But we need to harness it very well for it to be productive for the country. We have very creative people in this country. We have very talented people in this country. People in music, film, entertainment sector, ICT, they're all ready to do well. But we just need to capacitize, support them. And if they do well, we'll even be able to attract more foreign investment to the country. The paradigm has shifted. Before, it used to be attract more foreign investment to the country and country take off. But investors want to go to countries where they see the locals are doing well, because it shows the locals are doing well in their country that the business environment is good. Because what is good for the locals is also good for the foreign investors. So we need to do more. At our foundation, we have experimented this and we're seeing results. We started with the first 1,000 entrepreneurs. 50% of them are from Nigeria. And 3 years down the line, the stories they tell us and we see is quite encouraging. We're seeing people starting with just little sums of money, $5,000, $10,000, and making progress, employing from 1 person to 10 to 20. And that is why I said that SMD are the engine of growth. When they begin to recruit people like this, they train themselves, they train the people they get on board, and when GE is coming to the country, they have ecosystem pipeline of supply chain that will support even what they are doing. So to get it, continue to get it right as a country, we need to continue to prioritize our SMEs and continue to improve the environment that will help them to succeed. We need to make sure that key things that they need, access to electricity, is so important. It affects everyone. We need our entrepreneurs, our young ones, our SMEs. They should not be bothered about getting generating sets, about the issue of transportation. If some of these things are provided, they will be able to succeed. And as they succeed, it helps the country to succeed. So I would say that we need to do something about the huge unemployed people we have, who have energy capacity. And if we don't fix this, it is going to be a problem for us as a country. It will be a major problem.
Yes, sir. Mr. Rice, why does GE find Nigeria attractive?
You know, we're drawn here for a number of reasons. Human capital, size of the country, natural resources, and we have believed since I've been coming here that there will continue to be progress, and that's exactly what we've seen. So while we talk about the frictional cost, it's only because those are the things that slow down the progress that we know will be made over time, and we think speed matters. So we don't get so frustrated that we leave. In fact, we double down. We've invested $100 million over the last 10 years, and we expect to invest more. This is a great country with great potential, and I don't think anybody in this room is confused about that. We certainly aren't.
So the nature of your business is such that you work in infrastructure, you work in technology. In many ways, you're working in sectors where government support and sort of big business support is what is required. When we're looking at businesses that perhaps don't necessarily work in your sort of sectors, and people talk about the size of the Nigerian market, for example, we know we have a potential big market, but in real terms, you're looking at maybe buying power that is strong of about 14 million people. Wearing your business hat, how do we attract other businesses that don't necessarily operate in your sector, but potentially could come in and do well because of our population?
Well, I think it starts with having the basic infrastructure in place. And infrastructure, there's like a hierarchy of infrastructure needs. It's all not created equal. It starts with electricity in our view, and we don't say that just because we produce the equipment that makes it, okay? But without electricity, I mean, think about it. You can't have basic health care because most of the things that come with basic health care have a plug, right? You can't educate. It's very difficult. This notion of sustainable, inclusive growth is almost impossible without electricity. So organizing that priority, making sure that real progress is being made to put more kilowatts on the grid and then process it so that it gets to people who pay for it, right? That's another important element here, is essential to this idea of sustainable, inclusive growth. You will not have growth that reaches all segments of the population without more electricity. It's very difficult to do. Then you will attract the companies who will need that electricity to be able to create dependable operations. It's really linked, and one of the challenges I see in a number of countries where we operate is that we lump infrastructure into one basket. And roads and bridges become as important as everything else. And I'm not saying roads and bridges aren't important, but you have to have electricity in order to make this process work.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vice President, when we talk about localization, people sometimes point to the Local Content Act and what happened in the oil and gas sector as an example of legislation that has added real local value to a sector. The growth has been there from something like 8%, I think, to 14%. And we've seen changes in terms of ownership of oil and gas assets. Not much has changed, actually, in terms of real employment, because, again, there are no skills. And so we end up with Indians, people from Bangladesh, Chinese people working in that sector. And I'm just wondering, in terms of just this new initiative of localization, what are you looking at to make sure that we get the advantages we got from local content in oil and gas, but we do much better than we are doing in that sector?
I think first, it's important perhaps to understand that the oil and gas sector isn't really a high employment sector by itself. And really, there are quite a few Nigerians working in the oil and gas sector already. But it's really more the incremental parts of the oil and gas sector, especially where you have the petrochemical industry and you have all of the associated industries around the oil and gas sector. Where those are active, there you create the jobs. So it's not really so much about local content in the oil and gas sector, but more the additional or the incremental jobs that are created by the associated industries such as petrochemicals, etc. Now, if you see what has been going on lately, you'll find that, well, there is a fair amount of work going on in those areas. For example, Indorama just opened a 1.5 million metric ton fertilizer plant. There's several of those that are going on. I think about 11 plants were just opened recently.
Yeah, and in most of them, the people who are actually building the plants, the people who are sort of providing the skills for the plants are actually foreigners.
Not necessarily. Nigerians are very actively involved in not just the building of the plants, but investing in those plants. I mean, several of the plants are Nigerian-owned, several of them. Of course, there are quite a few foreign investors, but several are Nigerian-owned, and several, of course, are by Nigerian investors. Of course, we could do more by having perhaps more middle cadre, and we've talked about that, middle cadre skills. But most of these investments anyway are Nigerian investments. But I just wanted to say something about the power sector, which is quite important, and because Tony and co are all involved in the power sector. And for me, I think the most important thing is really ensuring that that sector is opened up for private sector investment in the way that it ought to be. Unfortunately, when the first privatization took place, some of what happened was that, okay, I mean, most of the private sector companies that took over were very highly leveraged. And there's very little investment going into especially distribution at this point. What we found is that we're going to about over 7,000 megahertz in capacity, right? But distribution has proved to be a problem. No metering. The discos were meant to meter. They were meant to go out there and ensure they metered and collect. But that has proved impossible because obviously they don't have the resources to invest. So we've had to undertake a number of initiatives. One of them is the Eligible Customer Directive, which was just issued in October. Now, that Eligible Customer Directive allows a willing buyer, willing seller option. So in some senses, it breaks the complete monopoly of discos in being able to supply electricity. The other is with respect to metering. We now have an independent metering process, which is also one of the new directives of NERC, which also allows individuals who are not necessarily discos to invest in metering and to actually meter. So there's that last mile which needs to be done. So even with increasing generating capacity, and Tony's company and several other companies have obviously improved generation. And generation is improved considerably. But that last mile is absolutely important. And there we need plenty of investment, especially in terms of distribution.
There are those who believe that actually that last mile is best dealt with through the democratization of power. What do I mean? Mini grids,
yes.
Getting people away from the national grid.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering whether this is something that is being considered.
Oh, yes. Certainly. I mean, I think that the whole idea, and this is really the point we're making about the eligible customers and willing buyer, willing seller. So you can build, so you have a plant. For example, look at what has happened with some state governments that even have plants. Lagos state government, for example, has about 4 or 5 IPPs, but was unable to sell the power. So all they could do was provide the power for public facilities. But now, with the eligible customer arrangement, they can sell their power directly to a willing buyer. And that's really the sort of thing that we're talking about. That it then becomes possible for you to do any off-grid thing. We're doing off-grid power, especially in solar. There's a project with the Ariaria market. There's another with the Shomolu printing, the printing ecosystem. And there's yet another with Kano. So there are quite a few of those initiatives. Of course, we're encouraging them, especially with renewable energy. We're encouraging as much off-grid initiatives as possible, because you really can't, just by using the grid alone, you really can't satisfy the power requirements of Nigeria. So there are quite a few of those off-grid initiatives. Yes.
I'd like to open it up to the audience, but before we do, perhaps I could have your thoughts, all of you, maybe starting with Mr. Vice President, on what are the sort of real actionable things that we can do to take advantage of changing dynamics in the globe, with businesses that are beginning to look a little bit more inward, like I said at the beginning. So in real terms, what can we do?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, so part of my job is to get you to commit to things, you see.
So tell me what to commit to. So tell me what to commit to.
So we want some sort of, in your view, short-term, you did talk about some of the short-term measures, but what are the sort of real actionable things that are possible, so that when we come back next year, and we're sitting here and we're talking about a global environment which has changed, we can talk about how Nigeria took advantage and the tangible successes from taking advantage of the shifting environment.
Okay. So I think that first, what we're doing in infrastructure is important. And we intend, of course, to complete all of those. I've already spoken about what we're doing with customs and the single window project, which would enable customs processes to be much faster. And we expect to see results. Certainly, we expect to see results within a year. We're also looking at the agro-allied industry, improving investments in the agro-allied industry. We're looking at power and several of the initiatives I've talked about, and we expect to see results. We expect to see results using the eligible customer directives and the independent metering directives that have just been issued. We expect to see improved, not just generation, but the last mile as well, improved distribution. So we expect to see our 7,600 megawatts of power or so being more effectively delivered to the people. And we expect to see more off-grid initiatives. And I've given a few of those examples already. So I think that there are quite a few of those initiatives that we expect to see in the next year. And if you look at what has happened, even in the past, between the last summit and this summit, we can mention almost 10 different items, and I'm going to mention them when I make my speech, of the things that have been done. I mean, even the ERGP, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, the NIFEX, the foreign exchange, the new foreign exchange regime, opening the new window. Last year we were talking about foreign exchange difficulties and all of that. We've opened the new window within this year, and so many other such initiatives. So we expect that practically everything that's been said that we'll do, we hope we'll be able to achieve within the next couple of months, and certainly within a year.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Elumelu, what would you like to see?
For me, two things, soft and hard. The soft one, someone was commending our legislature not long ago. If they indeed have passed the bills that I heard they passed, very good, but there are a lot more bills to be passed. We need, and on Sunday be here tomorrow, we need to engage our legislature. They need to help us pass bills that help to complement the executive arm of government is doing so that this country can take off. Two is we have talented and creative young Nigerians, educated, very creative, and some of them are in the creative sector. They need support. We need to prioritize it. They talk about the issue of piracy. Government should be able to, and with our vice president, let's focus on this and see what can be done in this area to unleash that sector. They spend so much, they have invested a lot of their intellect, but they don't get a lot out of it. If that sector succeeds, it will also help to boost the development of the economy. The hard point, or still soft, we need to prioritize the SME. Today, my message is about the small and medium-scale enterprises, the entrepreneurs. If they succeed, we succeed as a country. I have big business, but I know the strategic relevance and importance of small and medium-scale enterprises. With 180 million people and rising, it's estimated by 2030, Nigeria will be 300 million people, and out of them, about 75% will be under the age of 30. We need to think ahead. What will solve this issue? And we also heard the poet, what he said. We need to engage our young people. And the way to engage our young people is those stifling issues that affect their ability to succeed, which leads to the last point I want to make, the issue of power, access to electricity. We need to help to fix this. If we fix electricity, SMEs take off. I do business in 21 African countries. And our people are extremely energetic, enterprising, and they indeed want to succeed. But they need the right environment to succeed. We appreciate what government is doing today, but electricity, we need to collectively do more in that sector. And as the Vice President said, I do, as a player in that sector, empathize and sympathize with government in that area of the last mile, the discourse. But Mr. Vice President, I think there are a few things we can do to correct the ownership structure in that sector without affecting the property right of investors. That sector must be dealt with for this power access to electricity to actually begin, because government is doing well, as I said before, 760 billion naira provided. A few months' time or years, it will be exhausted. The market should be able to sustain, its sector should be able to sustain itself. Then we can say we fix the power sector. We fix this, we take off.
Okay.
Tony, I wanted to ask you a question. Yes. What is that fixing?
This is what I think.
I want you to tell me about it.
Very, very good. Mr. Vice President, I know some operators in the sector won't like it, but this is it. It's clear, as you said, that some investors in DISCO have been highly leveraged and do have money. You invest a lot in DISCO. You need to get the meters, etc., so many things. I have a new house coming up, and to get the transformer, they say I should install transformer. This will assist people to assist them to increase their revenue, but okay. This is my idea. We cannot reverse what, in my viewpoint, we shouldn't reverse what has been done, but we should creatively address what has been done. If government, to my understanding, during the process, owned 49% of the DISCOs, and the private sector owned 51%, can we ask for this company to recapitalize? If this company is recapitalized, if you say that existing investors are leveraged, that means they will not be able to put more capital. So let it be capitalized, and if you have a bit of patience, sir. The federal minister, the investor there that owns 49%, maybe it's Federal Minister of Finance Incorporated, whichever agency, should increase their investment. So post recapitalization, they have like 51% or 52% or 60%. Then government cannot sell their 59, 51% or 60% to investors. In this case, the selection process for the investor should be very strict so that those who genuinely have capital come into that sector. And so they have 51% or 51 to 60%, and they come in. And honestly, whether they are foreigners, wherever they come from, to my viewpoint, it's not an issue, not an issue. It should be people who have capacity and tested expertise in fixing this. Should come in, and then we'll have new ownership.
Mr. Lumelu, let me see if I can clarify what you're saying. Are you suggesting government should put more money into businesses that have been privatized?
Yes. Let me contextualize. Yes, and I say have patience, please. Yes, you have. You need to fix a problem. It's a holding action. So you.
Why not the other way around? Dilute their.
No, because some people have 51% already. If I were an investor, I'm not, and you're saying they're not well run, I'm not going to come into a company that there's control already by people who say are not running it well. But if the controlling interest changes, that you can have 51%. So when government comes, maybe to buy 2% or 5% more, so that what you're selling becomes attractive. If it's Canadian Power Disco that wants to come, they know they are coming to be able to run the business. So that is what I'm suggesting. Government put in for a period and can even sell at a premium.
Is there an appetite? Is there an appetite?
Tony is, as he said, trying to ensure that he doesn't offend the current owners of those businesses. I think the reality, Antonio has pointed out, the reality is that if you want to change the ownership structure, it is simply saying that some people have to divest. You simply have to take away, and it's not government. It's not government that will buy. It's investors like Tony who have the resources, and people who have money who will buy. He knows that. So he knows that. He knows the government simply does not have the resources to do so. Government already has 49%. And really the elephant in the room in all of these discussions is how to ensure that those who currently hold those assets and who have no money to run them, give them up to those who can run them. That's the elephant in the room.
Quickly, we're running fast out of time, so Mr. Rice, quickly on your thoughts on things that we can do before I open up to the audience.
I think this has been pretty interesting. I want to keep going. I'd say two things. It's going to take public and private capital to address all the needs in this country. And so you have to attract both. The government has to do its part. Private investors, public companies have to do their part. And for that, you need some clarity. You need an agenda that lays out in the key sectors, energy, health, transportation, agriculture, what you want to look like in 5 or 10 or 15 years, and allows investors to come in and say, okay, here's how I can support this part of the agenda. Here's how I can support another part of the agenda, with some expectation that they'll get a reasonable risk-adjusted return, because capital's going to go wherever it can get that. And if it can't get it here, it's going to go someplace else, right? And then at the micro level, I'd go back to the point I made before about speed. The fact of the matter is that sometimes in a company and many times in a government, speed is not even measured. And there has to be a speed dimension to everything we do together. We have to have the right say-do ratio. We commit to do something. The government, whether it's Nigeria or any country we operate in, has to hold us accountable. And we also get to hold the government accountable for what it commits to do. And when that happens, you're going to see a lot more investment here, and a lot of these infrastructure needs are going to get taken care of.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have time for only 3 questions, unfortunately. The lights in my eye, I can't see very well. So there's a gentleman right at the back, in the middle row. Come this way to the gentleman in the white. And this direction, I need a lady, please. Yes, there's a lady right there at the back. So 3 of them, please, and then we'll come back to the panel. And when you talk, please tell us who you are for context. Thank you.
Do I proceed? Your Excellency,
yes,
I think this is a my name is Dr. Ikenna Nwosu. I'm a facilitator with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. 3 quick points.
1, please.
All rolled into one.
1.
In the light of what the gentleman from GE said about speed, and in the light of what the Vice President said about a customs review, is it possible that by Monday next week, I'm serious, there will be no customs officers or roving vehicles on the road except at the border points approved by ECOWAS?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Moderator. My name is Mansour Ahmed. I work for the Dangote Group. It is clear from the discussions, Mansour Ahmed, Dangote Group, from the discussions and indeed from all we have gone through since morning, infrastructure is a key driver for the ERGP. And delivery of infrastructure, speedy delivery of infrastructure, I think seems to sum up most of the key issues that have been raised. And I believe that one of the primary delivery mechanisms for speedy delivery of infrastructure, as enshrined in the EGRP, is the public-private partnership arrangements. Now, we saw from Archer Leke's presentation that we have not been effective or efficient in delivering PPP projects. Only 1 project in the last 4 or 5 years. Now, my estimation is that part of the problem is the slow process, both institutional and regulatory, in actually closing public-private partnership arrangements. I would like to ask first the Vice President and a subsidiary question to Mr. Rice, what are we doing to accelerate the process of public-private partnerships so that this mechanism will help us deliver the infrastructure we need as quickly as possible? And the question to Mr. Rice, fortunately, GE has been involved over the past 2 or 3 years on delivering a PPP project. The question is, are we doing the right thing in terms of moving PPP forward? What more, as a private sector partner in this regard, do you think we could do to accelerate public-private partnership arrangements?
Thank you, sir. There's the lady right there at the back.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Abimbola Ayeni. I'm an entrepreneur, and my company name is BIMCAF Palace. And my question goes to the Vice President. The same window that is being created in the customs, I don't know if they can help us create such windows in NAFDAC and Standard Organization of Nigeria, where we have a common ground that, I mean, the same window created for customs, same single window. I don't know if Nigerian can help us create same for NAFDAC and Standard Organization of Nigeria. So we will be able to sell our products. Some of us have ideas, just like Mr. Tony said. We have great products. The Vice President can testify. He has seen me before in the Msme Clinic. But when you go to superstores to sell, they keep telling you, without this number, we can't do anything for you. Okay. But with the SME, we move forward if they can help us with this. Thank you.
Okay. Harmonization, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I think
with respect to whether by Monday all customs officers will be out of arrest. Well, I mean, let me just say that I have no control over that particular matter. But I think the real issue is whether or not we should have those kinds of obstructions on the road. And I can assure you that this is a very important concern for us, removing all of the various layers of security and all of those, not just in the ports, airports and the seaports, but also on the roads. And this is something that we're looking at very carefully. Obviously, the argument of the customs is that enforcement requires their being able to be mobile and to move around, especially because there's a lot of activity through our land borders. But that argument, of course, is one that has always been refuted by saying that you don't set up checkpoints. If you want to be mobile and all of that. But I can assure you that is something that we're certainly looking at, and the ease of doing business, PEBEC, has already taken note of it, and I'm sure that we'll do something about it, maybe not as quickly as next Monday. Mansour wanted to know about PPPs and what we're doing to accelerate the process. Outside of actual legislation, which would have been helpful, right? I think that PPPs have largely proceeded on, I think they've largely proceeded on several factors which really determine how business is done and how quickly or efficiently you can put together structures in Nigeria. For example, the PPP, and perhaps the one that's referred to, is the Lagos-Epe Expressway, the toll road, which is possibly the one that was being referred to by Achaleke. Now, that PPP involved, first of all, there was legislation. Lagos State government had legislation on the matter. But I think that one of the critical issues around it was also all the other factors that conduce to ease of doing business. And those factors were important in putting together that PPP. I think as we make the business environment outside of legislation now, as we make the business environment easier, as we make things easier in terms of collaboration or in terms of even registering business, pre-investment approvals, incentives, etc., PPPs will be far easier to do. And really, what people want is a level of certainty. What investors want, whether they're local or foreign, is certainty. They want to be able to, they want to know that when they bring in capital, they're able to repatriate, they're able to get dividends. There's reasonable assurance that disputes will be settled within, a decent time frame and all that. So a lot of what we need are really institutional. And I think that as we continue to refine those institutional problems, we will be able to do PPPs more effectively. And again, you will find that even the desire to do these PPPs is also important. Government must also be interested in doing the PPPs. And I think that for a lot of our investors, they're also finding that the subnationals are possibly as important, if not more important, than the federal government. So engaging with the subnationals at that level is also something that I think is very important. And you find that that's happening, especially in the agro-allied industry. We're seeing a lot of PPPs in the States, and we're seeing that that's happening quite a bit. So I think as we refine the business environment, things will get better. Abimola wanted to know about NAFDAC and SON. What we've tried to do, and I'm sure that you understand this, is exactly that. NAFDAC and SON, and that's the reason why we take them to all of the various places where MSMEs meet. What we intend will happen, and we hope that in this next phase, as we appoint a new management to NAFDAC, we'll also be able to reform their processes and make their processes faster, because we absolutely need to make those processes faster, and that will also take the cooperation of the MSMEs. I think that what NAFDAC would always say is that many of the MSMEs don't meet the requirements that easily. But if you look at the number of requirements, and this is something we're working on, we must reduce the number of requirements, but at the same time, we must also be absolutely certain of the integrity of products that get into the market. So it's a balance, really, and we have to be able to achieve that balance. But I'm sure with the new management at NAFDAC, we will be able to do a lot more. And just as we sit down to look at all of these issues with the MSMEs, I'm sure we'll be able to work through this quite quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mansour asked you a question, yes.
I think that a lot of the right things are happening. They just need to happen faster. And we have a role to play in that. No, look, I don't want to confuse anybody. I think businesses, we have a role to play in helping develop processes that can move things along more quickly, or pointing out what we see in other countries that might be applied here. So we're not shirking from that responsibility. I think that's part of what partners do, is help each other get better.
Thank you very much. And just a quick recap. Global politics means we have opportunities to localize, but in order to do that, we need certain things, especially infrastructure, a lot of emphasis laid on power. The last mile, for example, the Vice President has promised that we're going to see changes that will mean we'll be able to take up the 7,000 megawatts that we're currently producing. He's made a promise regarding the single window for customs for ease of import and export. He's also talked about the fact that we're going to have accessibility. People will be able to harmonize. Ease of doing business is going to get better. Mr. Rice has said that we need to look at making sure that we get risk adjusted for returns, because money will go where that happens. Mr. Elumelu has laid an emphasis on the fact that young people are driven. They need to be given the capacity, and we need to also encourage SMEs. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you at the other sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me quickly invite the Honorable Minister and the Chairman of the NESG to please step forward here and join them in group photograph before His Excellency the Vice President addresses us. I would like to also invite His Excellency the Governor of Gombe State to join this photograph as we welcome the Minister of State for Budget and National Planning. Thank you very much. And so, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we will not allow him to step down. We will now invite His Excellency the Vice President to step forward and officially declare this summit open.
Thank you. And after
Thank you.
Your Excellency, the Governor of Gombe State, Governor Ibrahim Hassan Dakwambo, and representatives of Their Excellencies, Governors of the states present, the Honorable Minister of Budget and National Planning and co-chair of the National Economic Summit, Senator Udoma Udo Udoma, the Honorable Minister of Communications, Mr. Adebayo Shitu, other members of the Federal Executive Council present, heads of government agencies and parastatals, captains of industry, the chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Mr. Kyari Buka, panel of discussants, Your Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me say first that it's a pleasure to be here again at this year's National Economic Summit, and I bring you warm greetings from President Muhammadu Buhari, who sends his best wishes for successful deliberations at this meeting. The annual Economic Summit occupies a special place in our national economic dialogue and is at once a statement of the priority that we attach as a government to close collaboration between the government and the private sector. And at the same time, it's an opportunity for us all to engage in meaningful discussions on the national economy. Our policy of partnering with the private sector is also born out of common sense and reality. While the federal government, on its part, is determined to build a modern economy, its ability to do so is limited by its financial capacity. Its annual budgeted expenditure of 7 trillion naira is only a small part of what is really a multi-trillion naira economy. The private sector is clearly a bigger contributor to the economy, and it follows that the private sector must be enabled and encouraged to play its decisive role if our development efforts are to succeed. In the period since the last economic summit, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan was articulated and adopted. And this dynamic document, which was developed through extensive consultations with stakeholders, lays out our national economic priorities over the next 3 years with a short-term focus on getting the economy out of recession and placing it on a trajectory of sustained inclusive growth in the long term. Several issues were raised at last year's Economic Summit, and in keeping with our commitment to keep faith with the work of the summit, we've taken several significant steps in response to the specific issues that were raised last year. Let me just speak of a few of those issues. First, the economy, of course, as you know, has returned to the path of growth after a continuous slide from 2014. And it's now well known that we exited recession in the second quarter of 2017 with a modest GDP growth rate of 0.55%. While inflation has similarly declined continuously from its peak of about 18.6 in January 2017 to about 16% today. Second, last year there were concerns about availability of foreign exchange and the rapidly deteriorating exchange rate. The situation has been turned around and stabilized. Foreign exchange reserves have risen to over 32 billion, and end users have increased access to foreign exchange, partly due to increased export earnings and remittances, as well as the introduction of a dedicated transparent window for investors and exporters, NIFEX. The results have been encouraging as the inflows of capital in the second quarter of 2017 have risen to about $1.8 billion, which of course is almost double the first quarter of this year at about $908 million. Third, another issue of great concern last year, which has been resolved, was the loss of a significant amount of oil production. At some stage last year, we were losing up to 1 million barrels of oil daily. But due to the engagements that we've had with the Niger Delta and the new vision for that region, production has been restored to nearly 2 million barrels per day, and with some figures even in excess of 2 million barrels a day. At the same time, the debt overhang preventing required additional investments in the oil sector have been addressed through the plan to pay off joint venture cash call arrears. There's renewed confidence in the sector, and we're already seeing significant investments. Fourth, for a variety of reasons, including shortage of gas, limitations in transmission capacity, and financing constraints, power supply was in the region of about 3,000 megahertz. We tackled these issues, and although there's still vastly inadequate power supply, we've moved up to 7,000 megahertz in generation terms. We are at the moment dealing with the constraints in distribution with two notable policy interventions. The NEC, or National Electricity Regulatory Commission, in August issued the eligible customer directives and will this month issue directives on independent metering. The eligible customer regime allows willing seller, willing buyer arrangements in the sale of power, while the independent metering directive allows independent entities from registered power distribution companies to sell and install meters and to customers and be paid directly as collections are made from metered customers. This will break the distribution gridlock, and there's good cause to believe that we will not just achieve our 10,000 megahertz projection envisaged in the ERGP, but also be able to deliver the 10,000 megahertz. Fifth, we undertook to begin the process of diversifying the economy, leading with the agricultural sector. Agriculture has created a large number of jobs and is an important source of raw materials and means of generating foreign exchange. Our Anchor Borrowers Program, launched by the President in 2015, has benefited up to 200,000 small-scale farmers and attracted investments of up to 43 billion naira from participating institutions. What is particularly encouraging is that we are moving steadily towards self-sufficiency in rice, in sorghum, and several other products, and scaling up at least in 8 other commodities and produce. And these, of course, are vital for food security and also for export. The Presidential Fertilizer Initiative has resuscitated 11 blending plants with a capacity of 2.1 million metric tons, with the products being sold to farmers at between 5,500 and 6,000 naira, without subsidy and far less than prevailing market prices. But the best news is the enthusiastic response of the private sector. Walcott opened its 120,000 metric tons parboiled rice plant in Kebbi in August. This is the largest parboiled plant in Africa. Indorama opened its 1.5 million metric ton fertilizer plant, while Dangote announced its investment in 1 million metric tons of rice mills. Sixth, this time last year, we had promised to take steps to revitalize the railway sector. The now concession narrow gauge railway will soon come into full operation and help redress the high cost of freight, especially of food items. I also had the distinct pleasure of kicking off the construction of the Lagos-Ibadan segment of the Lagos-Kano standard gauge rail line earlier this year. The seventh issue is a complaint made at the last year's Economic Summit about lack of consultation with the private sector. Although we refuted this then, but of course it no longer can be said to be the case. The Industrial Policy and Competitiveness Advisory Council, which I chair, consisting as it does of leaders of the public and private sector, is an excellent example of government-business cooperation and is contributing through various recommendations to addressing the challenges facing the manufacturing sector. Moreover, we have now had several sessions of the Presidential Quarterly Business Forum, which enables an exchange of views between the federal government and the organized private sector. The last meeting, we had a very useful interaction between the private sector and heads of the regulatory agencies on how to improve the business environment. This leads me to the 8th point, which was raised last year, our efforts to improve the business environment. With the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBEC, we introduced reforms under a 60-day national action plan focused on 8 areas that make it easier to register, that make it easier to do business. This includes registration of business, obtaining construction permits, and we've had to work with certain specific subnationals to achieve this. We're working with Kano, we're working with the Kano State Government, with Lagos State Government, and the Rivers State Government. Trade across borders, facilitating the entry and exit of people and registration of property. Our visa on arrival process has proved to be quite effective, and we've got several testimonies on the visa on arrival process. These are some of the examples of what we've tried to do with the ease of doing business. But the second national action plan, which will bring about similar results, was launched at the beginning of this month. Ninth, the last year, most of our social programs were still framed around projections. This has changed. The Empower program for unemployed graduates has employed already 200,000 young people, with another 300,000 set to be recruited in this current phase. With regard to the homegrown school feeding, we're feeding close to 12 million children across 14 states that are participating in the program currently, with the numbers expected to ramp up as it begins to cover 21 states in this new academic session. The JEEP program, which gives credit to MSMEs, is also growing quite rapidly. The challenges and obstacles facing MSMEs is the 10th area in which we are striving to make progress, and some progress has been made since last year. We've addressed some of the regulatory and financial challenges facing this crucial sector. The national MSME clinics have been taking place across all the states in a systematic manner, and has helped several thousands of MSMEs to engage with regulators, such as business and product registration issues, access to finance, export requirements, amongst others. In addition, an executive order promoting local content in government procurement has been issued, intended to give preference to Nigerian small businesses in specific sectors. One of the critical things that the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria has proposed to us in support of the local content initiative is that they've asked for what they describe as margins of preference for local content goods. In other words, what they're saying is that if you want to prefer local content goods, then you must take care of the requirement or the problem that local content goods have. In other words, that they're usually more expensive than imported goods. And so we have to take care of that by what they describe as margins of preference. So if a local content good is 35% more expensive than an imported good, we still will buy the local content goods. That's the sort of proposal that they are making. Now we're looking at that proposal, and we're looking especially at the percentage for procurement purposes. But we do agree with the principle that if we're going to promote local content goods, then we must find ways of preferring them to import. And we think that the margins of preference is a sensible way to do so. Now, these 10 issues which I've mentioned are not the complete picture of what has been done since last year, but they're rather an indication of the responses to the issues that were raised here last year and what government has done about those issues. And I want to say that the administration remains focused on implementing the ERGP, and our actions thus far are just the beginning of changes required to turn the economy around. The key thing is that issues of concern raised in this forum must be systematically addressed, and we're committed to doing so. And we want to continue to work with you on some of the other lingering concerns, because we think that this forum is important not just for throwing up the issues, but also for interrogating what actions government has taken to ensure that those issues have been addressed. We're for example, concerned, as most of us are, with interest rates and the very high interest rates. And of course, most of that has to do with government borrowing. On account of government borrowing, there are obviously problems around interest rates, and we intend to look at those issues very closely. The evidence, of course, points to crowding out of business, of private business, and we think that that is correct. The federal government is therefore trying to reduce the demand for domestic paper, and will seek to refinance maturing domestic debt with long tenor and cheaper external borrowing. Meanwhile, intervention funds will continue to be made available through the Bank of Industry and the repositioned Nexim and Bank of Agriculture and the newly established Development Bank of Nigeria. Going forward, the federal government will continue to sustain the dialogue with the private sector, and most notably through the National Economic Summit, but also through the presidential quarterly Business Forum, and various sectoral bodies. We count on the continued engagement of the private sector to support the economic policies of this administration. And I certainly look forward with anticipation to receiving the outcomes of this 23rd National Economic Summit. And so it's now my pleasure to formally declare open the 23rd session of the National Economic Summit. Thank you.
We appreciate you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much.